Hello and welcome to another episode of Jorgy's Stripping the Dipping podcast. I'm your unusual co-host F1 Blag. And today we have a fantastic guest and I'm going to do my best to come up with a stat and I expect that I'm going to be shot down. It will make sense in a minute. So the guy that we've got on the episode this week has done, I think this is his 20th anniversary season in Formula One. So if you were to look up Formula One drivers, I don't think there's a driver that has consecutively done those seasons. So without further ado, I'm going to call him the actual stat man, but he goes by the name Virtual Stat Man. Sean Kelly, welcome to the show. How are you?
I am great. Currently, just to set the scene here, I am in Doha in Qatar. I am talking to you from the 40th floor of the Intercontinental Hotel. And I have Doha and the bay here overlooking me. It is a spectacular sight, and a spectacular sight to confirm to you that yes, there is no driver that has done every single season that I've done in Formula One. But Fernando Alonso was on the grid in my very first Grand Prix, and he's now so old that he's gone away from Formula One and come back again. Got out of the old people's home, got him back into an F1 car, and he's still good. So me and him have been avoiding getting a real job for 20 years now.
I know. What are you going to do when you grow up? Who knows? We'll explore that.
I'll get round to it eventually. I'm too busy with other stuff going on right now. But
yeah, just that pesky, long season with intercontinental travel as well as the intercontinental hotels. So, Sean, look, when you meet people, and I know you're going around with the paddock. So let's imagine it's the winter, and you're just sort of like low key hanging about, and you introduce yourself to someone. Like, how do you explain who you are?
Well, you mean just like in everyday life?
Yeah, because obviously we love Formula One. We're on F1 Twitter. We know who you are. And everybody that sort of follows Formula One sees you as the virtual stat man. But like, if you're meeting a new person, you're down the pub or wherever you get your hair cut at New Barbers or something, they go, oh, what do you do for a living? Who are you, Sean?
Well, I live in America. I live in Southern California. And I have done for a long while now. I've lived in the US for 16 years. And I must say, for the first 13 and a half of those years, no one gave a crap what I did for a living. It would go in one ear and straight out the other. Or they might make some reference like, is that the series that Danica Patrick does? Or is that the one that races at Daytona or that kind of stuff? No, and no. And then during the pandemic, of course, everybody went and watched Drive to Survive. And then suddenly, once we came out of the pandemic and I'd be in social situations, suddenly I was rocketed into being the most interesting person in the room. What? You work in Formula One? What? You mean Drive to Survive? Yes, that's what I do. Well, you've never mentioned this before. Actually, yes, I did. You just weren't listening because you didn't know what it was. Thank you, overlords at Box to Box Films for making Drive to Survive, because you've definitely helped my social circles. But I genuinely, I don't talk about work in my spare time. I mean, just like anybody's job, when you're away from it, you don't think, oh, let's talk about work. So if someone asks me what I do for a living, I say, well, I work in sports, or I do some TV stuff. And if they have to, I kind of leave them to dig. If they really want to find out, it's not a secret, but I also don't want to come straight in with saying, well, I work in Formula One, because it sounds a little bit showy. So unless I want to impress them, of course. I did go into a coffee shop once, and there was a woman sat there working on a laptop, and she had a sticker of Lewis Hamilton on her laptop, and a sticker with the F1 logo on it. And I thought, I've got to do it. I've got to go over there. I've got to go over and ask her if she's a Formula One fan. Surely she is. And I did the whole, well, you'll never guess what I do for a living conversation. She was a bit taken aback when I said, well, I'm going to Azerbaijan next week.
As you do, yeah.
Yes.
Well, look, I've read a bit about your entry into the sport. We're going back 20 years. But before that, like, what's your earliest memory of motorsport? And did you have a favorite driver growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I started watching Formula One in 1987, which I'm going to guess is older than both of you.
Yeah, just about a little bit, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm starting to feel old now. Bloody hell! Like, anyway, yeah. So my earliest memories of Formula One was the start of the '87 season. So, Brazil was my first race watching it on television, just because my older brother had control of the television, so I didn't have a choice. In the first, that's how I was a captive audience the first time I watched it. But no one in my family was interested in racing. It wasn't really. My brother watched it casually. He wasn't as big of a fan as I subsequently became. I kind of took him along for the ride, really, once I was into it. So that's my earliest memories were Nigel Mansell, Williams Honda FW11B, winning at Silverstone, really, when he passed Piquet with 2 laps to go. When he was 28 seconds behind with 30 laps to go and got on new tyres and closed the whole gap again and passed him with 2 laps to go and then ran out of fuel on the slow down lap and everyone at Silverstone invaded the track and chaos. So that's really what got me properly like on board as a just about to be 7-year-old. I was very influenced by that. And then back in those days, what is now called Formula 2 was called Formula 3000, and it's not very well documented, not very well recorded. But Formula 3000 used to race on the streets of Birmingham, and the 1987 Birmingham Super Prix took place like a month after that British Grand Prix. And when we went to that was the first time I'd ever seen racing cars in person. And my earliest memory of that is, holy crap, these things are so loud. I was so surprised as a kid because I'd only seen them on TV. I didn't know how ear-splittingly loud they were. So we spent all of the morning practice session trying to find me ear defenders so I could actually be comfortable without having to put my hands over my ears. So those are the early days for me.
So from a kind of captive audience, you then basically dragged your family along and made them the captive audience as your interest took over. Fantastic.
That is fair to say. It was always, it was something I found naturally interesting. And I can't really explain to you why. I can't remember why I found it interesting as a child, but I did. And it's obviously never left me. I think sometimes I think to myself, sometimes I find myself sometimes looking at modern day Formula One and thinking, would kids be interested in it? Like if I was 6 years old now, would I find this interesting? And I'll never know the answer to that, obviously. But as a 6-year-old in 1987, I found it all tremendously exciting. And it's all very exotic as well. When they're racing in places like Brazil, because in 1987, the idea of watching satellite television pictures from Brazil was incredibly exotic. Now, of course, we can FaceTime each other. I mean, I'm talking to you from a hotel room in Qatar. We take it for granted now. But in 1987, it was, incredibly out there. Well, I was actually talking about it last week when we were in Tokyo last week. We were talking about it, how watching television pictures from Japan in 1987 was just almost unheard of. And yet we had a Japanese Grand Prix in 1987. It was like, wow, it's like a magic window to another world where they don't speak our language and they don't have our alphabet and wow, everything's so technologically advanced. So that maybe that was part of it. Maybe it was just like, it was a bit like a what's the word? A travelogue. All these weird and wonderful places they go to every week. And you think, wow, that's cool. You get to see the world and, watch a bit of racing. It's turned into my life. It's turned into my life. Right? I literally just described my life. Oh my God.
Maybe there's a 6-year-old out there that's, going to become the virtual Statman 2.0.
Well, in the words of Take That, someday soon, this will all be someone else's dream.
Okay, we're getting sort of prophetic or philosophical.
Well, we're also getting into song lyrics by Take That. So there we go. We're only 12 minutes in, and we're already getting very philosophical.
We're balancing it out. So then, of course, you went to Motorsport University, studying Formula One statistics, BSc, got a first, and went straight into Formula One. No, from my reading, you kind of had a civilian job. Right, and you took a leap of faith and made it into Formula One as a statman. So, what What did you go to uni, or like what were you good at school? Did you have an inkling before you dived into Formula One that this was something you were going to be good at?
I did go to university, but only after I started Formula One. And actually, I didn't finish the degree because Formula One took off so much that it became basically redundant. I didn't need it. It was obvious to other people, probably more than me, just how diligent I was on Formula One history and numbers and so on, because I honestly thought everybody else was taking it in at the same rate I was. So when I was at school, let's take that 87 season as an example. Ayrton Senna was driving, to me, the Lotus 99T with active suspension. Whereas to everybody else, he was driving, in my class, that is, in class of 7-year-olds and 6-year-olds, he was driving the Camel car because it was the yellow car sponsored by Camel. And we didn't even know what Camel was, obviously know what it is, know what that product is now. But back then it was just a Camel. So it was like, oh, he drives the Camel car. And I thought that, all my peers were taking it all in at the same rate. So if I was to cross-reference something that happened in 1988, I remember when, Ivan Capelli passed Ayrton Senna down the straight at Estoril in 88, I naturally assumed that everybody would know exactly what I was talking about and why that was significant and blah, blah, blah. And it turns out, no, they actually had other stuff going on in their lives or didn't find it as interesting as I did. And in the mid-90s, my mom said, you should probably get a job in Formula One. Murray Walker has to retire one day. They'll need new people. And I used to think, yeah, right. Like anybody gets paid to just talk about facts and stats in Formula One. That never happens. And then eventually I thought, well, I don't know. It can't hurt giving them a ring, can it? What's the worst that could happen? Because my career had gone from strength to strength, I must say. Stop me if you get jealous here at any point in this description. I'd gone from making car parts for Toyota in a factory to pot washing in a restaurant of an Italian restaurant kitchen. I sold wine fridges for a while. And the thing is, once you've done those 3 jobs, really the only place for you to go is the World Championship. If you think about it, there's me and Oscar Piastri are the same. Like pot washing in a restaurant, selling wine fridges. You can only go to F1. It's like winning F3 and F2 in back-to-back seasons as a rookie. It is the only career move you can make, straight into Formula One. So naturally, I actually rang American television first because I was dating an American girl at the time. And I reasoned that I had better odds of success if I called American television than if I called British television. So I thought they'd probably get less calls about Formula One. What's funny is I didn't know anybody there. So I was blagging it. I was completely blagging. I didn't even have their number. I was having to call like various offices of Fox Television to eventually get the correct number for the correct department. And I left, and it went to voicemail. I had to leave a voicemail, and it was, hi, this is Frank Wilson. Leave me a voicemail. Blah 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 blah. Hi Frank, this is Sean Kelly. Blah blah blah. I'd love to remember what it was I said on this voicemail. This is in October of 2002. It was after the Japanese Grand Prix, the end of 2002, and pitched them the idea that they should hire me as the researcher for 2003. And 2 days later, to my complete shock, he called me back. And then I was really in it because he was like, well, can you show us an example of your work? I said, sure, I'll send you something over tomorrow. I hadn't got any work. I didn't have any work to lean on. So I had 24 hours to come up with something. So I did that, and I said, could I have a look at what you've been using? And he faxed it to me. That's how long ago it was, folks. Nice. He faxed it to me. And I went through it like a teacher marking a paper and faxed it back to him an hour later, just to sort of show, look, I do know what I'm talking about. Look how quickly I've gone through this. And then we got round to like a month before the start of the season in 2003. And I called him about 12 times over the winter, making sure he hadn't forgotten. And then he said, look, we could hire you, but we really can't pay you very much. We could only pay you like 200. That's literally what he said, 200. And I said, yeah, fine, Frank, that's fine, no problem. And I put the phone down, and there was a 30-second period of euphoria when you think, oh my God, I've just been hired to work in Formula One. I've made it. And then I went, wait a minute. That means I've been hired to work in Formula One. What if I'm a moron who doesn't know what he's talking about? I'm about to be exposed as a fraud. My whole life's been a lie. And then the final part was, did he mean 200 a race or 200 for the entire year? Because I didn't ask him before I put the phone down. So I didn't know I was going to get paid. But the point was, we hung up before he could change his mind. He made the offer, I accepted, and I've been here ever since. So however it worked, it went the right way.
And so that was Speed Channel, was it, in the US?
It was, yeah, Speed Channel, because what you formerly called Speed Vision, which was a motorsport centric network, as the title would imply. And they had the rights in the US from 96 until the end of 2012. And from that day forth, first race was Australia 03. I worked with them until their contract ended at the end of 2012. Actually, my claim to fame within television is that since my first day, Australia 03, I am the only person who has worked on every single broadcast on American television through the entire 20 years. Production staff's changed, commentators have changed, channels have changed. I'm the only person who's done all of them, whether it's on Speed Channel, NBC, CBS, ESPN. And in fact, even when Daniel Ricciardo did his show, The Grandstand, with Will Arnett, I actually did the live broadcast with Sky Sports, which goes out in America, and I did the Grandstand with Daniel Ricciardo at the same time. I was doing two shows at the same time, and the camera was on me as well. So I was responding to Daniel Ricciardo in Vision on air, while at the same time corresponding with David Croft about what we were talking about with stats. So it was like, holy crap, we've got a lot going on here.
So, give us a bit of a behind the scenes take, because you just described basically interacting with two different live broadcasts during a race, and presumably that's sort of slightly abnormal. But during a race, where are you? And you mentioned talking to Crofty. Do you talk to him during the race? What are you doing for that sort of 90-minute period?
Well, when the cars are on track during the qualifying and the race, all of the networks, virtually all of the networks, log into Virtual Statman. That's where the name comes from. That's where my internet handle comes from, which basically is a glorified chat window. It appears on their screen in the commentary box, and I will put anything that's relevant at that moment on the screen in front of them. So if in qualifying, oh, look, both Red Bulls have just got out in Q1. Oh, wow, that's a big shock. And so it'll say on the screen right away, oh, first time that's happened to Red Bulls in Japan 2006, or, so instantly it's in front of them. So they don't have to really go looking for this information. I'm basically already behind them, making sure that they've got it. A lot of the work is done in advance. Like, for instance, for Qatar this week, the work went out yesterday morning. So everybody's had 5 days to read it before the cars hit the track. And then they can decide what stories they want to discuss, what narratives they want to make, what graphics they want to build, what they want to get into commentary and so on. So that's all quite regimented. So everybody knows where they're going to find that information every week and so on. And then during qualifying in the race, they know they have me there as, basically their point of contact. In the case of David Croft specifically, we've been on stage together. I mean, I host at the track as well, and we have a really good working relationship together. He likes stats, and I'm really good at writing them, so it's a pretty good combination. But I don't often, I won't get a lot of correspondence from him while we're on the air, because obviously he's commentating. But sometimes he will ask certain things. Say, do you know? It'd be something small, like you say, like, do you remember exactly what lap Verstappen pitted, or do you know what the gap was before Hamilton came in? It's little small stuff like that, just to make sure. Like, let me get the number right before I say this on the air. But generally speaking, he just trusts me. He trusts me to just get on with it and feed him whatever information that I think is relevant. And in fact, that's the same with most broadcasters. They just kind of, they just sign into it and they just let me get on with it. They all know it's me. They know that I'm the guy behind it. and it kind of clandestinely gives me a more influence than people probably realize in their media diet, because what I tell the commentators to say can often shape the entire narrative, because a lot of it goes out as social media posts and things like that. I'll see my own stats in news reports. I'll read the BBC's report of the race, and I'll see like, oh, that's my stat. That was in the middle of the broadcast. We said that. I'm a bit of a sort of I float under the radar, I guess. People don't necessarily know who I am until they see me on the stage and I explain. So the reason I have this job, folks, is ... Yeah, I do have. I guess I don't want to say I have the ability to really shape things, because of course it's the drivers and the teams that are shaping things, so their results are what actually matter. But it's very important for me to try and reflect it correctly. So there's a lot of pressure.
No, I can imagine. And, I tend to do a bit of research by like trying to find people on LinkedIn before. And when I look at your profile, obviously you mentioned you're a host in F1 Experiences, but it just lists broadcaster after broadcaster, and actually in different languages. And it says, whatever the start date was, -present. So like, without exposing your balance sheet, perhaps, like, roughly how many broadcasters kind of log on to Virtual Statman each weekend?
About 20, I think.
Oh, okay.
There's about 20 broadcasters. F1 themselves use it. Two of the current Formula One teams I provide materials for. I've worked for another one in the past. Two more are interested in using it next season. I never really targeted teams. I didn't think teams would be that interested, but it turns out they are more interested than I thought. Then there's the hosting stuff, and the reason that they've sort of realized it's quite good. Why don't we put Sean on the stage, because he's actually the expert that the experts use. So he actually has some credence to his presence on the stage. And in the case of F1 Experiences, our guest clientele are usually really big fans who want more than just a grandstand seat. Like, they want to be up close and personal with the sport. They're not just there to update Instagram. You know what I mean? They're actually, I don't need to explain to them what the C1 compound and the C2 compound differences are. They already know all that stuff. They know what DRS will do. They don't need the beginner's course. So having me up there as the host, it's like, well, if you've got any questions, chances are I've got the answer. So they fire away.
Wow.
So that's how the hosting part came into it too. But also, and we shouldn't underestimate this part, I'm also probably about 100,000 euros cheaper than hiring Jenson Button. And I think that comes into it as well.
Well, you don't want to undermine your value here. Maybe you need to put up your price slightly. Maybe
next year I'll only be 50 grand cheaper than Jenson.
There we go, right? Exactly. Supply and demand. So, here's my question to you, because, clearly, it's fascinating to be in your presence, albeit virtually. And if you're in on a race weekend, the temptation will be for someone to just sort of challenge you or ask you a question. Do you ever have, I don't know, if you're under the weather or you haven't got much sleep, does your kind of gift wane, or is it kind of a superpower that's always there? And do you top it up with lots of research and prep? How do you keep it topped up?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a superpower, and I wouldn't say it wanes. It's neither of those things. It's more like, say, for instance, if you're speaking to somebody who's been a carpenter for 20 years and you say to him, can you make a table for me? Oh, yeah, I can do that blindfolded. That's so second nature to me. It's like that with stats for me, because I spend literally thousands and thousands of hours a year working on stats, specifically for F1. So I get so much exposure to all this stuff that, it all starts to go into my memory. Like, for instance, today, I was looking at a social media post today about the 1988 Japanese Grand Prix. And somebody had mentioned in the mentions, in the comments, oh, Ivan Capelli starred in that race. And without thinking about it, I said, yeah, so that one lap he led in that race was the only one that was led by a normally aspirated car from 1983 until they banned turbos at the end of 1988. And I just did that off the top of my head, because I know that because I've done that stat before. So I I almost get bored looking at having to research stats because here's my day job. Occasionally I get put on the spot. I actually quite like being put on the spot. It's quite fun because it's, you know, that's the party trick, isn't it? That's something you can do, you know, just on the side. It's not the boring grind of work. It's a bit like, I guess it's a bit like when a footballer plays keepy uppy. You know, it's like, I wouldn't do this on the pitch. I wouldn't do this in my job, but it's kind of a kind of fun party trick to do.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It's sort of, I don't know, it could be a bit like a natural musician. Maybe the music lessons or the big performances, there's a kind of different, there's more professional vibe to it. But when you're just jamming, you kind of get that true joy. So I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good analogy for it. And actually, when the funniest times I get put on the spot is sometimes I'll be like in a hotel bar somewhere, and there'll be fans in there, and then when they find out what it is I do, it's quite often it can be that there'll be somebody in the group will say, "Oh, you have to meet my friend such and such. He knows every Formula One stat on the planet. And I bet he knows at least as much as you." I love when that happens because it's just like, it's like, okay, they drag the person in, you know, like who's reluctant, but their friends are convinced they're going to know as absolutely as much. And I say, well, does your friend like spend, you know, 30 hours a week doing research on this subject? Because otherwise you're kind of putting him up as a hiding to nothing here. And I'm not saying he doesn't know a lot about what he's talking about, but you know, if he's got like a different job, the chances are he hasn't spent as much time working on it as I have, because you know I'm being paid to do it. It'd be a bit embarrassing if I didn't know more, wouldn't it? One time I had a guy in a bar ask me. He said to me once, "Okay, I've got a question. I bet you can't get this one." And he went, "The Ligier team." And I stopped him. I stopped him there. He got 3 words into it. He went, "The Ligier team." I literally put my hand up to say stop. Stop. Joe Slesser, right? And he went, "How did you know the answer? I hadn't even asked the question." And I left it at that. And I reasoned, like, I thought, right, well, what's significant about the Ligier team? Where's he going to go with this? Well, Ligier, all of the Ligier chassis, the chassis designation began with JS. And it's JS because it was named after Joe Slesser, who was friends with Guy Ligier. And after Joe Slesser died at the 1968 French Grand Prix, in homage, Guy Ligier named his chassis JS and a number. So I figured he must be going that way. If he's talking about Ligier as an entire team, I reckon that's what he's going to ask me. So I worked out by a process of elimination what the question was going to be and got the answer right before he got the question out. And that's probably my finest hour in terms of being a nerd. Is actually that guy probably is still in therapy dealing with that. He must think I'm like some like Uri Geller stuff going on.
I mean, that's not bad. I mean, yeah, it's pretty incredible. So like, here's a question for you. Do you have any sort of, I don't know, emotional attachment to stats? So for example, do you have a favorite F1 stat, one that brings you more pleasure or seems nicer than the others?
Do you mean like one that I actually put to air? Like what I actually
it could be, it could be one that you're sort of, oh yeah, I nailed that, we got it out. Or just in general, like if in your, maybe it's too nebulous to ask that question. Like if you think about F1, what, you know, is there a stat that comes to mind? It's like, yeah, that's the one that's most satisfying. I don't know.
There's a couple, and they come from my first year when I was still new and still having to sort of prove myself. The second race I ever did, Malaysia 03, was won by Kimi Räikkönen, and Fernando Alonso was on pole position. And that was the changing of the guard moment sort of in the generations, because it was Räikkönen's first win and it was Alonso's first pole. And it was my second race. So we'd gone from Schumacher winning everything in 2002. And suddenly Alonso's on pole, youngest man ever on pole, youngest man to lead the race, youngest man on the podium. Räikkönen wins the race, second youngest driver ever to win. And Barrichello was the other guy on the podium. And I worked out, like, you know what? I think this is the youngest average age of a podium we've ever had in Formula One. Now, at that point, I didn't know what the record was because it was only my second race and I hadn't had any I hadn't had time to really learn. But I worked out, said, well, you've got the second youngest winner and the youngest man ever on the podium. That therefore means, I mean, Barrichello's only 30. That must be the youngest podium ever. And it was only after the fact I found out that, yeah, it was. And it broke a record that was 29 years old. Belgium 1974 was the previous record holder. So they were very impressed that I'd come up with that. And then at Monza that year, Schumacher won at Monza in 03. And I had calculated before the race started the exact race time that was necessary to break the all-time record for fastest race ever, which was from 1971. That had stood for 32 years. Schumacher stopped the clock, 1 hour and 14, blah, 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 whatever it is. And immediately I said, you know, that's the fastest race in history, just under 154 miles an hour average. And we put it to air before Schumacher even reached Parc Ferme. And then the rest of the day went by and nobody else reported it. It was literally just on Speed Channel, fastest race in Formula One history. And it got to like 9 o'clock that night. And I thought, oh my God, I've made them look like assholes. Like no one else is reporting this as the fastest race. I've done the calculation 6 times and every time the answer is the same. And I've changed the equation around, you know, worked it out backwards. It still comes to the same answer, but no one else is reporting it. I must have got it wrong. And I literally sent an email to everybody in production saying, guys, I think there's a possibility I might have done this wrong because no one else is saying it. And then I went to bed that night thinking, well, it's been great. I'll always be able to tell people I worked in Formula One, just the one season. But I guess it's back to looking for a real job next year. And then fortunately, Monday morning came round and everybody else started to realize, oh, it was the fastest race in history yesterday. It broke the all-time record. And all of a sudden, it was like, oh, thank God, I'm saved. And then the next race was Indianapolis. And I went to Indianapolis and then, you know, we go to the St. Elmo's, the famous steakhouse in Indianapolis. And Ross Brawn and Jean Todt are at the table next to us. And, you know, all the top journalists are like in other table and like Jacques Lafitte's propping up the bar. And you're just like, holy crap. Like a couple of weeks ago, I was contemplating going back to pot washing in a restaurant. And now I'm hanging out with the Ferrari hierarchy. Bloody hell. So yeah, that's my favorite one.
It must be a surreal world. Yeah. And you must have met quite a few of the paddocks. So we have a game on this show just to break things up as we sort of perhaps just past the midway point. We call it Taxi Dinner Avoid, which is a kind of PG version of a slightly ruder game, which we won't mention. So basically you have, and let's give you the luxury, because avoid is the hard one for you've got to be diplomatic, but luxury of any driver that's featured in races that you've covered. Who would drive you to dinner, i.e. taxi? Who would you want to have dinner with? Because they're fantastically interesting company. And which driver would you wish to avoid? And yeah, we'll give you the luxury of that 20-year span for you to pick.
Blimey, those are good questions. Yeah, there's a lot to pick from. You're right. Who would I want to have dinner with? Sebastian Vettel, I think. Who I always thought was a great guy, even when he was at Red Bull, you know, nicking multi-21 wins from Mark Webber. I always thought because he was getting booed a lot because he was winning all the time. I just thought, I don't know why are they booing Vettel? He's such a good guy. Like when you know him, and I don't want to say I'm like mates with Sebastian Vettel. It's not like that, but just, you know, it's like you spend 5 minutes around somebody and you get a good read of like, is this somebody I'd actually want to hang around with for another 5 minutes? And Vettel always was charming and nice, and I just thought, what a good guy. So I'd want to have dinner with him, I think. To be driven to dinner. Now, well, look at the possibilities are endless there, aren't they? Blimey. I know who I'd. How about this? Could I be driven to dinner? Let's say. Oh, I know. Nico Rosberg. Can Nico Rosberg drive me to dinner?
Ooh. What would drive that? What makes you want to pick Nico?
The reason is because there are some in Formula One who think Nico's a tricky customer. Like he's difficult to interview. And every time I've interviewed him, he's always been brilliant, without fail. We did a thing in Hungary this year, me and him, and he came out and he said the nicest thing, probably the nicest thing anyone's ever said about me on stage to anyone. He literally came in. He said, "Hey guys, just want to let you know, you're very lucky in here because you've got like the biggest statistical brain in Formula One is your host in here. So like he can tell you anything about anyone, and we all use him as well." And I was waiting for the punchline. I was like, he's setting me up here, isn't he? He's going to come up with something. He's going to turn to me and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were somebody else." But he didn't. He just left it at that. And then I responded. I thought, well, while I'm winning, I'll ask you. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll launch straight into this. I said, "So Nico, can you tell us why is it you follow my wife on Twitter but not me?" So we turned it into a comedy skit, and it went on for like 10 minutes. This thing. So Nico, I picked Nico Rosberg there because I think he's misunderstood. Because we seem to get on great. And who would I avoid? I tell you what. Here's a diplomatic one for you. I would have Nico Rosberg drive me to dinner, and I'd instruct him to avoid Max Verstappen because Max gets very angry if Nico was to drive into Max would be angry. And you get it on the radio. So I'd tell Nico, "Could you avoid Max, please? Because you know what Max is like. He'll get very angry with you." So yeah. Although I full disclosure, I've been around Max Verstappen as well, and he was perfectly polite to me. So
I'm now on the subject of stats, and that was a good answer, very diplomatic. Perhaps one of our most diplomatic, actually. Looking at, you mentioned sort of Nico and Max coming into contact. I'm now racking my brains for whenever, like if they ever did.
Don't think so. I don't recall it happening. I mean, they really realistically would only had that possibility throughout 2016. And of course, Max's famous win was a consequence of Nico Rosberg being one of the two Mercedes out on the first lap.
So. Yeah, I happened to move to Brazil in 2016. So I was in Interlagos. I was in the very, very wet conditions, sat there at the end of, the Reta Oposta. And that was the race where I think, was it Max or Nico did a half spin, caught it and kept going. And they must have been near each other then. Yeah, Max, but they didn't crash. But, they probably would have been near each other. Yeah. Okay, there we are. Okay, well, here's a question on stats before we just talk a bit about F1 news this week. And this will go out on Saturday. So what a great qualifying session we've all just witnessed. Fantastic. Question for you. Is there do you know where the kind of gray area and then the sort of outside of your zone of comfort, your kind of statistical knowledge is? So, for example, race wins, qualifying results, numbers of races competed in, etc. Fastest race in history, age of podium. You've got so many strings to your bow. But have you got this kind of? Are you clear on where your kind of zone of comfort slightly gets fuzzy and then ends?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that part of my remit is it's not necessary for me to know all this in my head, but it is necessary to make sure that I know that it goes on the air quickly and accurately. Now, whether I know it in my head is academic, because what you have to do is make sure that what goes to air is correct. And I might know it in my head, but I'll still double check it. I think, I'm sure these numbers are right, but I just double check them as a procedural formality. Let me just double check this is right before we send it. There's certain things where I think I do need to double check this because I'm really not certain. And then some, there'll be some stuff where you have to do a properly deep dive, like stuff that you wouldn't know off the top of your head unless you had a database to help you. For instance, I'll give you this nugget for free. Now, see if you can spot this at some point during the Qatar Grand Prix weekend. Lando Norris has been second 4 times this year, and he hasn't finished in any other position on the podium. Now, that ties the record for most second-place finishes without any other podium positions in a season. And it ties it with Nick Heidfeld in 2008 and Giuseppe Farina in 1952. Now, plot twist. Giuseppe Farina in 1952 is one of 2 drivers in history to finish the runner-up in the World Championship without winning a race. The other one was Ronnie Peterson in 1971. Now, Lewis Hamilton can join Farina in that category if he gets ahead of Checo Perez and finishes second in the championship as a driver who will finish runner-up without winning a race. So we could have two unrelated Giuseppe Farina 1952 references on the same weekend. Tell you what, this is what Formula One fans have been waiting for. Giuseppe Farina references from 71 years ago.
It's really spooky. I could hear you saying that, but it was almost like Crofty's voice was then almost being ported on top of it. I can hear him reading that,
Well, you play a little bit of Statman bingo with David Croft this weekend, because when you hear that on the air, you'd be like, wait, I know where that came from. I've heard that one.
Yeah, trademark, we know it. Fantastic. Yeah. Okay. I mean, because you talked about Giuseppe Farina, and obviously he was, right near the start of Formula One. In fact, the first world champion, unless I am completely mistaken. But which clearly, is he not? What, 1950?
No, Did he win it? I said which you are not. You are not.
Oh, which I'm not. Oh, thank God for that. Right, phew. I can't make errors in front of the virtual stat man. That would be.
No, you are correct. He was the first champion, and he was the winner of the inaugural World Championship event.
Ooh. So here's the question: how about your knowledge beyond 1950? Before that. Have you kind of trained that? Or I know that obviously it's a bit like football, the Premier League, all the stats kind of almost restarted. Is it maybe it's sort of damaging to your broader marketability if you have too much knowledge before 1950? But I don't know. Yeah. What have you got much of a knowledge before
that? It gets more patchy after that. It's I would say that my knowledge is the World Championship. Yeah. It's the simplest way to put it to you. Because, for instance, I'm not that great with non-championship because at some point you've got to draw a line of knowledge. And sometimes in the 50s and the 60s, there would often be far more non-championship races than championship races. And the records weren't kept as well. The entry list was a bit more haphazard. And sometimes the claim of being a non-championship F1 race was dubious at best. I think the 1980 Australian Grand Prix, for instance, at Calder Park, I think there was only 3 F1 cars in the race, but they called it a Grand Prix, a non-championship F1 race, effectively. When really, I think it probably better to say it was a Formula 5000 race. So it gets much more iffy at that stage. But when you're dealing with the World Championship, it has finite criteria. What the formula was for that season and so on. So it's the records are much better, and that's my area of expertise. I can't claim to know every race victory by Tazio Nuvolari or Rudolf Caracciola, but I'm familiar with their work, certainly.
It's almost a different genre, who knows? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, when we're dealing with pre-war Grand Prix racing, it almost is a different genre. So I think honestly, that's Joe Saywood's great with that stuff. He wrote a book called Grand Prix Saboteurs about Grand Prix drivers and the war and so on. And we all have our eras actually. We all have. I think my specialist era is probably the 90s. If I had to nominate one, well, late 80s. I mean the first 10 years, 10, 15 years when we're a fan, I think always defines it. So if you've got somebody who's born 20 years before me, they'd probably say their era is the mid 60s. In fact, I mean, if you've ever spoken to Peter Windsor, he'll talk your ear off about Jim Clark. I mean, he's the ultimate Jim Clark aficionado. Literally owns one of Jim Clark's old road cars. So Peter will talk to you all day about Jim Clark, and I'm quite happy to listen because to me it's like having an education because he's such a I don't want to say fanboy because that sounds kind of that sounds disrespectful. But really,
super fan.
Exactly. Yeah, super fan. Probably a better way of putting it. Yeah. He really, if you want to know anything about Jim Clark, Peter Windsor's your man. I mean, he'll give you anything.
I was just before we dive into a couple of pieces of F1 news, I was just thinking, you've got a job where you need to know a lot about Formula One. You need to deliver under pressure. You use the word procedure when it's sort of about it may be in your head, but you check it and then you kind of go live with the information. You ever thought about applying for the job of F1 race director? Not up your alley?
No, I think no, definitely not. No, the thing is, we all think we know the rules, and we all think we know the procedures, and of course, almost none of us do. We think we do. It's funny, because just before we recorded this, there's been an egregious error in the Premier League football this weekend involving Liverpool having a goal disallowed incorrectly because of a VAR problem, a mistake. And ultimately, we don't read the rules. We don't read the rules, so we're not sure what the procedure are. We know in our heads what we think it should be, but we haven't necessarily read the book to say this is actually how you do it, and this is set in stone. These are the laws of the game. No, it's not an area that fascinates me. I mean, I'm quite excited when things happen in a race, and I think, okay, well, how does that reflect on history? If Verstappen's just done this, Hamilton's just done that. I find it much more exciting to be able to say, hey, I've just come up with this nugget of information, which you're now going to say on the air, which now everybody's going to talk about on social media, which will be in the news stories and everything. That's what I find interesting about my job. And I'd be a very, very mediocre race director, I can assure you. Partly because I have no experience, so the drivers wouldn't take me seriously in the briefing. Be like, who are you? Well, you come here armed with your stats, and you reckon you're Michael Massey now, do you?
Well, you're sort of underselling yourself, but never say never, because if we see you, in Bahrain or wherever next season, yes, new race director Sean Kelly has been announced by the FIA, then we'll suddenly realise that perhaps you had a change of heart, or 100,000 changes of heart. Who knows?
Well, if that was to happen, I would say that I was literally the only person willing to do the job, because I'm completely unqualified, and there is no way I should be doing that job in Formula One. I should go away and do a couple of Formula 4 races, regional winter series Formula 4 races, to get a handle on what's required before taking the big job.
Building your way up.
Yes, we shouldn't. There's too much. One of some of the problems of the world these days are because we elect unqualified people. So I must stick to my guns on that one and say no, that is not a job for me. Okay. As I said, a lot of us think we know the rules, but we don't actually know the rules. So no, leave it to the professionals.
And the rules are often imperfect in that they can't possibly envisage every scenario. And then we have to amend them once we've had that scenario and go, oh God, that could happen. We need to decide what we want.
Yeah. And in fact, I've got one for you.
Go on.
When we were looking in the rule book a few weeks ago, and we were looking at the tiebreaker situation, because we wanted to know if sprints had any tiebreaker power. And I think the rule book said, forgive me, I'm going to look this up. I'm going to actually try and punch up the sporting regulations as I'm talking to you. It was worded something along the lines of, the tiebreaker is the number of firsts in races, the number of second in races, the number of thirds in races, and so on, which is how we know the tiebreaker. But then I said, but it doesn't say Grand Prix or sprint. It just says races. So if we have a tie, and let's say, for argument's sake, that they've also got the same number of results, same number of firsts, same number of seconds and everything. What about the sprints? Like, does that come into it? Or does the sprint become a tiebreaker then? Or does the sprints also go in with the Grand Prix? So if you've got like 5 Grand Prix wins and the other guy's got 5 Grand Prix wins, but you want a sprint, does that mean that that's a tiebreaker? Because it doesn't say that. It says races. So what's a race? So, we were like, hang on a minute. Is this going to become a problem at some point in the future? Because remember what happened at Suzuka last year, when we all thought it was a half-point race, and even Red Bull thought it was a half-point race. Even Verstappen thought it was a half-point race. And then suddenly he was told, hey, congratulations, you've won the World Championship. What? Well, we didn't know a thing about it. We were like, what? Where's this come from?
It was an extremely odd moment, because I might be mistaken, but maybe the graphics on the world feed implied it was possible, but I just didn't pay attention at the time, or maybe that was overlaid on a replay. But the commentators didn't pick up on it.
Yeah, none of us knew about it. I mean, I canvassed everybody. I said, did you know about this? And they were like, no. It was first we knew about it when they said he was the champion. I interviewed Otmar Safnauer from Alpine a couple of weeks later on stage. It was one of the first things I asked him. I said, "Did you know?" He said, "Nope, we thought it was half points." I said, "Okay, then I don't feel so bad." I'd spoken to some of my friends who are camera operators for Formula One, and they'd said that in their headsets, they'd been told, follow the Perez-Leclerc battle, because if Perez gets ahead of Leclerc, Verstappen will win the World Championship. But that information had not been conveyed to us on the broadcast side, the people who are actually dealing with the on-air stuff. So there was a bit of a communication breakdown there. And unfortunately, again, it was actually, if you read the rule book verbatim, they were right. But how the rules were written was not how they were intended to be employed. But once you read them in a sort of legal standpoint, they were bang to rights. They had to award full points. So we ended up with a race last year in Japan that awarded full points, even though it was shorter than Malaysia 2009 and Austria 75, which are half points races. So it was a bit mad, but unfortunately, that's how we had to read the rules. So yeah, that's why I never get on a bandwagon when I started to like beat up on the officials, because I just think, well, wait a minute, they might know something we don't.
Yeah, well, the camera operators obviously did, and yeah, I think that's right. The director, who was director of the kind of video feed, it seemed like they had an inkling, but obviously on the commentary side, not. So news story number one that came out, I think, a little bit towards the end of last week was around the social media mentions of Formula One being down year on year, both 2022 and 2021. I was really intrigued earlier that you mentioned you've on occasion reflected whether modern Formula One would be something that would pique the interest of a 6-year-old, or whether things had changed. Do you have a sense or a theory as to why the numbers have gone down this season compared to last and the year before?
Well, I think there's a rather obvious cause, isn't there? Which is, we're kind of on the night shift in terms of competitiveness at the very front. And I could tell you until I'm blue in the face about how it's incredibly close between the rest of the field, but just that one guy is always at the front. I mean, we've had 11 guys on the podium in the last 11 races. I mean, that's some going. And we had, half a second covered everybody in Q3 in Hungary. It's really, really close. But that one guy keeps going off and winning all the races. And that obviously affects, that is going to affect your business, because it does get a little bit tiresome and a little bit predictable. With that said, Max is not doing anything that we haven't seen before. Lewis Hamilton's had these sort of seasons in the past, not quite to this extent, but he had several seasons where he won 10 races or more. We saw Schumacher do it. We saw Vettel do it. It was ever thus. But it is going to get less interesting as a consequence. I will contend, though, that coming off of 2021 was the best season in Formula One history. And I've lived through a lot of them. I'm old enough to have seen Prost and Senna when they were teammates at McLaren. And 2021 was 100 times better than 1988, easily. But what has changed, and this is really significant, and this is not really measured in statistics. This is a societal change. We have changed as a society. We are no longer prepared to do what we did in the 80s and the 90s, which is sit in front of the television for an hour and a half and wait to see if something happens. We're no longer programmed to do that. We're no longer willing to just sit, well, I'll watch it for another 5 laps. Let's just see how this plays out. Now it has to be like entertainment now, right this second. Entertain me now. Because if you don't, I'm going to go and look at my phone, or I'm going to look at my iPad, or, and that's what's changed in us. If it's not entertaining in the next 5 seconds, I'm going and doing something else. I'm going to look at another screen. I might leave it on in the background, but I'm not paying attention anymore. And that's the hard part. Is that, if Formula One gets processional, as it might have done 30 years ago, we're less willing to sort of sit there and wait it out. We'll just move on to something else. So, it's a challenge, but it was the idea that every season was going to be like 2021 was, that was. I knew at the time it was a gem. It was a season for the ages. There will literally be Hollywood films made about that season, sooner rather than later as well.
I mean, it depends who you're rooting for, whether you got the Hollywood ending. But I agree. I've probably I've not quite been watching as long as you, but certainly remember from about 1994 onwards. And yeah, I can't think of a season where it was so close and the driver in second suddenly had a pace advantage towards the end that meant it was going to go, competitively down to the wire, which is probably
I think,
made the difference.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a Max Verstappen fan, it was like a miracle sent from heaven. If you're a Lewis Hamilton fan, it's the greatest injustice in the history of sport. But either way, you're going to feel very, very passionately about that for the whole rest of the time you're a fan of Formula One. And that in itself adds to the drama of it. If it had just all ended, if that safety car never happens and Lewis Hamilton wins by 15 seconds and everybody shakes hands, says, "Good game, everybody. See you next year," and that's it. And it kind of peters out. But the fact that it ended in such a bombastic and divisive way just adds to the folklore of the season, in my opinion. Because Formula One's always been political intrigue interrupted by a Grand Prix, as opposed to vice versa.
Yeah, I think you're right on that one. It has that emphasis on the political intrigue first is it definitely chimes with me. So second of three news stories, and there is political intrigue here. This week, we saw the FIA approve the application of Andretti Global, newly titled Andretti Global, to potentially be the 11th team on the Formula One grid. And that now moves on to, I suppose, essentially Liberty Media or F1 to make a decision on whether they have the credentials and bona fides. So, one, what's your favorite Andretti stat? And I'm keeping it broad. Andretti, choose to interpret that as you wish. But two, what do you make of that news story? Do you think they're going to end up on the grid? And will that improve the enjoyment that we have from the sport?
Favorite Andretti stat? Well, Mario Andretti was supposed to make his debut at Monza in '68, but he was barred from competing because he was competing in a USAC race with that same weekend. And I think the idea was he flew back to the US to compete on Saturday, and he was going to fly back to Monza on Sunday to race. But rules said he couldn't do 2 races in a weekend, so Formula One wouldn't permit him to race. So he ended up making his debut at Watkins Glen '68, and he took pole on his Grand Prix debut. So there you go. And he's still also the last American to win in Formula One, Netherlands 1978.
Wow.
Yeah, indeed. Long time ago now. And Michael Andretti was the last American to qualify in the top 10 in a Grand Prix until Logan Sargent did it at Zandvoort, which you may have heard that stat go out on the air.
Incredible.
So, yeah. So there you go. There's a few Andretti stats for you. As regards the Andretti Global's entry into Formula One, I mean, I'm all for it, and there's no doubt. There is absolutely no doubt that they know what they're doing. They're not a bunch of big time Charlies who reckon they can be a Formula One team. Like, they've clearly got the credentials. But it's always been about the revenue. It's always been about splitting the profits, the prize money, and so on. And I totally understand why the 10 existing teams would be less than thrilled by potentially splitting it 11 ways, because all 10 of these teams have had to survive in an era before the cost cap, when basically running a Formula One team was literally like throwing money into a pit. You're just burning it. You'll never make any money running a Formula One team. It's impossible. But now in the cost cap era, we've got to a situation where you can actually make a living. You can get away with a profit on a Formula One team because you can only spend so much money. And I can understand it if they're thinking to themselves, well, hang on a minute. We went through all these years of just financial lunacy to get to these calmer seas where we don't have to worry about things. And now you're going to split the revenue with another team. Well, hang on a minute. That's going to affect our bottom line. And it doesn't matter that the name is an illustrious name. It doesn't matter how illustrious Andretti a name is in racing. Ultimately, they're going to look at the bottom line and says, why should we give away some of our prize money to an 11th team? So I completely sympathize with that point of view. At the same time, the other half of my brain is thinking, well, it'd be great to have another team, especially when it's a team that have proper racing credentials, a team that the name, firstly ran by a driver who's raced in Formula One, the son of a world champion, that's won in every category they've competed in, should be great. So I see it from both sides, and I hope that there can be a resolution, and they'll be the 11th team in Formula One, because I think they've got a lot to offer. But the main thing is that in the process, we don't put unnecessary stress on other teams. I'm not talking about Red Bull and Ferrari and Mercedes. I'm talking about Haas and Williams here, making sure that they're not sort of looking over their shoulder, thinking like, are we going to be able to make it financially? Because I'm kind of hoping those days are gone now.
That's a huge point about the cost cap actually restoring some hope of profitability into Formula One. I had not considered that at all. And when you mentioned revenue, I was thinking about the sort of, a bit like in Formula One, you get your TV money, which is, increasingly a significant chunk. But I was also thinking perhaps about the sponsors. For me, I thankfully don't have to take any responsibility for like the viability of Formula One as a pure fan. And I just see so many talented drivers going through the kind of feeder series and struggling to either get a fair shake in Formula One, and we'll come on to Logan Sargent in a second as our third story, or just never getting a drive. And, you were watching Formula One when I think they probably had pre-qualifying still. So, finding a happy medium would work. Yeah, I'm not trying to age you, but it was a period of high, a high amount of teams trying to compete in the sport.
Yeah, we had in '89 we had 40 cars, and
wow,
it would 40 cars that would show up, and then I think there was 10. There was 10 cars in pre. So there would be 10 cars in pre-qualifying, of which the top 4 went through. No, wait, there would be more than that. It would be 14 in pre-qualifying. The top 4 goes through. So qualifying proper. So then you're down to 30 cars. Qualifying proper is 30 cars. Bottom 4 are out because they don't qualify, and you end up with a grid of 26 cars. So that to me is a full grid. A full grid to me is 26 cars. I haven't seen 26 cars since 1995. Was the last time.
Wow.
So the grid has never looked full to me ever since. But as I said, the financial realities are I totally sympathize. I could never go to Toto Wolff or Freddie Vasseur and say, look, you're just being a stick in the mud. Will you just accept another team? No, I totally understand it, because they're looking at the budget and thinking, well, why do we want to give these, Johnny come latelys a load of the revenue when we were here when we had to spend 300 or 400 million a year to be in this game? Now suddenly it's down to 142, and suddenly everybody wants in. Well, where were you 15 years ago when it was the Wild West?
Yeah, you're making far too sensible and compelling an explanation. And now I'm thinking about it in terms of football. Like, it would be saying to the Premier League, oh, go on, have 22 teams. You want to. And clearly there's a vested... Well, maybe some of the lower teams would be up for it. But again, it's dividing the total revenue by a greater number of participants.
Yeah. And the thing is if you had a regular source of revenue coming in, and I said to you, look, I'm going to join, and you can split your revenue with me, but my name is so illustrious that eventually you'll make more money. But in the meantime, you've got to give me some of yours.
Yeah, give me 10% of your wages, please.
Yeah, I've thought about this for at least 2.5 seconds, and the answer is, So you can see it from their side. But I hope that all sides can come to a resolution and we end up with 11 teams. Put it that way, because you are right. There are not enough seats for the amount of drivers that we have who are capable of doing the job.
Although, Formula One's loss is evidently IndyCar's gain, because quite a few of those sort of F2 graduates have gone across the pond and appear to be doing quite well. So, it seems to be working for them.
Yeah, it's not a first. I remember Gilles de Ferran, for instance. I was a big Gilles de Ferran fan in the 90s, and
obviously
he never raced in Formula One, even though he was brilliant in the junior categories. He went over to IndyCar and he became a champion and won the Indy 500 and so on. Same with Helio Castro-Neves, for that matter. And Tony Kanaan, another good example. There are many. Dario Franchitti is another one.
It was.
We need more seats in Formula One. Damn it, these drivers get into Formula One.
It's a really interesting sort of era that you point to, and I don't want to kind of geek out too much and alienate most of our listeners who probably were being born at that period. But like, actually, a lot of the drivers you're talking about probably got into that elite level of single-seater motorsport at around the time that the Formula One grid was shrinking. So, perhaps we could draw some statistical inferences, but who knows? Maybe it's just anecdotal at this point.
Well, I think the other thing is that the gaps between the haves and the have-nots are much, much greater. There is this perception that Max Verstappen has the greatest car advantage in history, which, trust me, is nonsense. He doesn't. But he may have an advantage, but it is nowhere near as big as some of the advantages I've seen in the past. And also, it is so very close between basically everybody who's not Max Verstappen. If you saw in Singapore, when we removed Verstappen from the equation, it was an absolute free-for-all. It was like, this is anybody's race. This is a thriller. This could be Sainz, it could be Norris, it could be Hamilton, it could be Russell. That shows you that although we only have 20 seats, we do have very, very small spread across the field. In Austria this year, Q1 front to back was separated by 0.858, I think it was, of a second. That is the first time ever in the history of Formula One that there's been a qualifying segment that involved all of the cars where the entire field was spread by less than 1 second. By way of example, in Imola 1988, Senna was on pole, Prost was second. The third place car was 3.3 seconds off pole. That's third on the grid, 3.3 seconds off pole. If you think it's boring now, let me show you a race from the 1980s.
Well, I am minded, like I remember there's a guy on YouTube or on Twitter that overlays modern Formula One graphics on sort of racing from that era, late 80s, early 90s. And they've done it for the Belgian Grand Prix 1991, which of course, Schumacher was his first Grand Prix.
Do you want, before you go on, do you want me to give you an appraisal of that race off the top of my head?
Oh, yeah, I'd love that. I'd go on, crack on, yeah.
So Schumacher qualified 7th, having lied about the fact that he said he'd driven Spa before. Well, Willie Weber told Eddie Jordan that Schumacher's been around Spa, I think was his precise turn of phrase, but he didn't say that it was on a mountain bike. Schumacher was 7th on the grid. Bratresi ended up 17th on the grid because he had his times deleted from Friday. So we had a Williams 17th on the grid. Schumacher was up to 5th for the first corner. Then the clutch failed going up the hill. Mansell took the lead of the race, and then the voltage regulator failed on the car. He dropped out of the race. Then Alesi ended up in the race lead in the Ferrari, and then the engine failed coming out of Eau Rouge. He was out. And then it ended up with De Cesaris nearly winning the race for Jordan. And that was the real excitement at Jordan that day. Never mind Schumacher. Schumacher was not the story that day. It was De Cesaris, because De Cesaris was closing on Senna to win the race, and then the engine failed with about 4 laps to go. And after all that, we could have had this amazing Schumacher result. We could have had the Mansell victory. We could have had an Alesi winning his first Grand Prix in a Ferrari. We could have had De Cesaris finally winning after like 10 years in Formula One. What did we end up with? A McLaren 1-2. It was that boring. And I think PK was 3rd in that race, and Moreno would have been 4th with the fastest lap of the race.
Oh my God!
And then Benetton rewarded him by sacking him and putting Schumacher in the car at the next race.
Obviously, Roberto Moreno, who perhaps never got a fair shake in Formula One. Intriguingly, I'm looking at the Wikipedia, and I'm sure if you're at home listening to this episode, you're looking at the Wikipedia now, marking Sean's homework, and he's got that spot on. That is unbelievable. Wow. Okay.
I don't remember who was 5th and 6th though, so I'm not perfect.
Well, let that be a mystery, because that might feel itchy. No, I'll tell you. Riccardo Patrese appears to be 5th, so he'd come all the way from the back, and Mark Blundell scored the final point.
In the Brabham Yamaha.
Right.
I guess that would have been that was Blundell's first point in Formula One, I think.
And Yamaha weren't around much longer. Sorry, Brabham, pardon me, weren't around much longer to score points. So,
No, I think they scored one more. I think Brundle got a point at Suzuka, and I think that was the last one. But he might have got 2 points on that race actually. And I think Patrese and Bell gearbox problem or something. He ended up stuck in 4th gear. I think he was tootling around by the end.
Ah, those were the days. So let's bring ourselves back to 2023.
Anyway, anyways,
and actually, we're going to end this news segment before we go to close the episode on a wholesome note, which is that this week, Williams announced that Logan Sargent will be renewed for next season in perhaps the least cutthroat move in recent Formula One history. So my question to you, and please don't quote me on that from a statistical perspective, because I'm sure there have been less cutthroat moves. But were you surprised by that? And I mean, you're in and around the paddock. Do you see Logan Sargent around? How do you feel he is?
Well, he's a world junior karting champion and a race winner in every category he's been in. He came so close to the F3 title that ultimately went to Piastri, and he lost it to Piastri in the final race. Perfectly capable. And when he started this season, I thought he was very unlucky to get knocked out in Q1 in Bahrain when he had the same lap time as Lando Norris. He should have got into Q2 and out-qualified Albon in Jeddah, but he needlessly cut the pit lane entry and got his time deleted, which is a really, really stupid error to make, and he probably was really angry with himself. After that, I've seen nothing to suggest he should still be in the car. And I know that's harsh, but as we said, we've got 20 seats here. We've got a lot of drivers to get through. And as Liam Lawson is proving, you can hit the ground running in this game. It is possible. And I don't know if Sargent has gotten lost a little bit or what's going on. I know Albon's obviously doing a very good job. But having seen that initial promise that we saw from Sargent, I haven't seen anything really to replicate that since. I mean, he's been very, very much an also-ran and thoroughly outperformed by his teammate. I mean, Albon's the only driver to out-qualify his teammate in every race this season. Sargent has a turn of pace. I mean, we saw him get to Q3 in Zandvoort. The problem is he then stopped it in the barriers, and he did it again at Suzuka. So maybe he's overthinking this. Maybe at the start of the year, he was just relying on his talent. He thought, okay, well, it's another racing car. I'll just drive it the way I drive racing cars. And then maybe as the results didn't quite come, he started to overthink this, a la Daniel Ricciardo at McLaren. And maybe he's got lost a bit, and he started to do exactly what Ricciardo did, which is pick up bad habits and just never be the same driver. So maybe that's why Williams has stuck with him. He was like, look, we've seen the numbers in the simulator. We know you can do this, but for some reason, it's not gelling right now. Thankfully, we're not in those eras. I mean, I mentioned the cost cap versus non-cost cap. It's no longer an era where you just have to bring money to the drive. Now they can pick these drivers on merit so much more. So although there might be sponsorship involved, it is no longer the lifeblood of a team's decision making. And I for one was surprised that they might not want to have Liam Lawson, because I think Lawson's done a hell of a job, and he surprised me, because I have to say I've never seen, when I watched Liam Lawson in F3 and F2, I never thought to myself, that's a guy I want in my Formula One team. I thought he was just kind of like another field filler. Like there's plenty of race winning drivers out there, of which he was one. But I must say he has grasped the opportunity. You never know when the opportunity is going to come, and he just got thrown in there when Ricciardo got injured, and he's done it. He's done an amazing job. Tsunoda hasn't beaten him in a race yet, so yeah, it just shows. Just saying you're a rookie driver and you've only done 15 races is not really good enough when you just stick Lawson in a AlphaTauri and he outperforms the incumbent driver.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously saw last season in the Williams, it was Nick de Vries had a fantastic, albeit one-off result in Monza. And, who knows, maybe he was already in negotiations with Red Bull Group before and got the AlphaTauri drive, and we know how that ended up. Some might say harshly, I would. But yeah, the way you describe Logan Sargent's sort of season is really interesting, and I share a lot of sympathy with that, in that right at the beginning, he seemed to be driving, I don't know, with a little bit more freely, but as the pressure has piled on with his teammates' performances and the crashes and the results, it hasn't helped him. So yeah, fingers crossed. James Vowles seems to be a very articulate and sort of thoughtful leader. So fingers
I
crossed.
I think James Vowles is the best thing that's happened to Williams since Adrian Newey left, because after Newey left, their trajectory was downward, and I think old Vowlesy's gone in there and started to whip him into shape, because it really seems like Williams are starting to get back on track now, starting to become like a. But put it this way: when Albon's getting into Q3, we're no longer thinking, "Oh wow, that's a surprise." Now we're kind of almost like, "Well, yeah, he's done that plenty of times." That's a surefire sign that, okay, that car's not out of position. The Williams should be up there, and that's the problem you got with Logan Sargent right now. He's getting knocked out in Q1 every week, and you're just thinking, well, come on, Albon's up in the top 10. What, where are you? Dare I say it? It might be the same discussion that's going on at Aston Martin right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's another angle laced in there, and who knows? I suspect both of them have already got multi-year deals for next season. But the story of Lance Stroll, who perhaps started off absolutely as a pay driver, a few years in won me over. I think I felt a bit guilty for being overly critical, but this season, particularly following his injuries, hasn't been anywhere near his teammate. So
No,
we'll have to see.
I mean, I've been, I don't want to say a supporter of Lance Stroll, but certainly a defender, because I've seen many drivers with infinite money who are shite, like just have no business whatsoever being in a racing car. And Lance Stroll is not one of those. Well, he is genuine talent. I'm not saying that he's the next, Michael Schumacher, but he definitely did enough in the junior formula to justify being a Formula One driver. If you looked at his record, and I didn't tell you what the driver was, if I just showed you his results, you'd say, well, this guy looks like he should be in Formula One. But he obviously has been outperformed by Alonso, and there's a decision to be made in the Stroll household, which is, am I paying for a vanity project for my son, or am I here to win the world championship? Because at the moment, it looks like it has to be one or the other. And Aston Martin are in serious danger of falling out of the top 4 in the Constructors' Championship, which is unthinkable earlier in the year when they were second. And, with McLaren suddenly on the upswing, McLaren could beat them to the top 4. So, that wouldn't be happening. That would not be happening if they had 2 drivers at Alonso's level. So, got to make the minds up there.
It's really interesting with Lance Stroll. Before we kind of come towards the end of the episode, on Lance Stroll, I saw a tweet earlier this week that said, the drivers currently under 25, which of them will still be in Formula One in 5 years' time or something? And Lance Stroll was in the list, and I thought, bloody hell, he's been in Formula One for quite a long time. He's got well over 100 starts. So how's he done that? And he's still only 24.
Exactly, yeah, because he started when he was 18. It's it is astonishing how young some of these guys are when they started. And the thing is, I mean, as I said, in Lance's case, he has shown he can be exceptionally good. I mean, Turkey 2020 was the race of his life. He was so unlucky to have that race sort of go away from him after he'd done everything right. Started from pole, controlled the race up at the front. I don't think he was going to beat Lewis Hamilton that day, but he certainly had minimum second places on the table for him. And then of course they changed his intermediate tires, and it turns out that was exactly the wrong thing to do. But that wasn't his fault, No. But he's shown he can do it on occasion. But it's a bit like, we used to have this conversation about Ralf Schumacher, about the difference between him and Michael Schumacher is that Ralf Schumacher could do it kind of when he was up for it. Michael could do it every race, and that's the difference. You're getting that same level of performance every race. That's what made Michael what he was, this machine, and that's what Max is right now, of course. So
yeah, we might be just releasing this onto the airwaves as the sprint concludes, and Max Verstappen.
Congratulations, Max Verstappen.
Yes.
World champion 2023. All right, there we go. It's over and done with.
Yeah.
The first Saturday champion since 1983. How about that, folks?
Oof. And why was that? Were they awarding points for pole position, or what? How did we get that in 1983?
Because the race was on Saturday.
Oh, okay. Very good.
Races weren't always on Sundays. They've only uniformly been on Sundays since 1986. Before that, we could have races on Saturdays. Sometimes we had them on Mondays and Tuesdays even. I think 1972 Spanish Grand Prix was on a Monday. So
obviously, as you do.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Wow. I mean, look, that is a fantastic stat to sort of end the main portion of the interview on. So, final question for you is, have you got any advice for a listener that might be aspiring to work in Formula One in one way or another? Any tips or anything that you'd want to say to them?
Well, I mean, I get that. I get that question a lot because, guests will come up to me at the track with exactly that sort of exactly that sort of question approach. And I always say jokingly, the three questions I get at the track is, how did you get your job? Can I have your job? And do you need an assistant? Those are always the three things I get. I would say, first and foremost, your qualifications, unless you're wanting to be an engineer, your qualifications are not as important as you think. They won't work against you. They'll always work in your favor. They're not as important as you might think they are. I've always explained the job earlier in the show. I explained how I got into Formula One. A lot of it was bravado and audacity and just basically getting in people's faces. And I think that's a very important thing to do. Now, 20 years ago when I started, there wasn't social media. Now it's very possible to interact with a lot of people in Formula One simply from your phone. You don't even have to leave your house. Which wasn't possible for me 2 decades ago. But it means you can cultivate your own brand and your own personality without actually working in Formula One. Well, before working in Formula One, of course, if you want to get into it. So I think it's important to do that. And then what will happen is you'll start appearing on the radar of people in F1 because they'll see your social media presence and think, well, this person's actually quite interesting. But then when you're at the track, do your best to try and befriend people, to try and interact with them in any way you can. And that would be my main suggestion, is that I've never, in my 2 decades in Formula One, I've never applied for a job. I've never, ever applied for a job in Formula One. I basically talked my way in, and then for the first 10 years, basically called people and demanded that they hire me. Basically, and often they would, just to get me to stop calling them. But then in the second 10 years, it's been the other way around. Now they call me. So you'll get told no a lot. That's normal. It's not personal. Don't take it personal. No never means no properly. It kind of means not right now, or come back with a better offer. So you hear no a lot, but don't let that bring you down. It eventually, think of every no you get is one no closer to the yes that you're looking for. So you just got to keep that in mind. You don't get, a lot of people give up, and if you give up, you'll definitely fail, because there's loads of people who want to be in Formula One, but you kind of have to have the staying power. I've worked with a lot of people who I thought were more talented than me, but they're not in Formula One anymore, because they kind of got fed up with the whole thing and just thought, oh, this is just not going anywhere. They didn't really want to stay the course. They had other stuff they wanted to do in life. And I always thought it was a shame, because I thought, why did they leave? They were so talented. They would have got there eventually. So yeah, you got to be stubborn. You got to stick with it. Don't block out the negativity, and just always be thinking, how do I make myself better? How do I make myself, what are they looking for? What is it that I have that makes me stand out from the crowd? What's the unique selling point? So always be working on those things. And don't be a dick. That's the other thing. That's my other quality advice. Don't be a dick, because Formula One is a very fraternal existence. Word gets around fast. So if you're somebody who's difficult to deal with, trust me, a lot of people are going to know. So don't burn your bridges. Don't take things personally. Always try and be as diplomatic and as professional as possible. And trust me, just by doing that, things will come to you. It will come round to you, just as long as you are always looking for the positives. Yes, you'll get a no. Why is it a no? Okay, let's go and sort this thing out and make sure that next time they can't say no because of that reason. Now I really sound like a telemarketer, don't I? You can tell I used to telemarket glazing. What do you mean you don't want double glazing? I can give you a million reasons why you need double glazing right now. It's like doing a telemarketing sales pitch. You just got to eliminate all the reasons for them to say no.
Yeah, I mean, we don't condone on this show ringing people up until they give you a job, but or at least until they, in a harassing kind of way.
I actually do condone that, because that's exactly the reason I'm sitting here on the 40th floor of the Intercontinental Hotel in Qatar right now, instead of still washing dishes in a restaurant. That's exactly the way I got in. So I cannot cast aspersions on others who would walk the same path.
Please fax Sean Kelly your CV if you are interested in.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Send smoke signals across
exactly.
the way.
Well, look, thank you. That's probably the most inspiring answer we've had to that question in the history of the show. So thank you. We might clip that and just say, look, if you want to work at Formula One, listen to Sean Kelly. Fantastic.
I'd love to know what all the other answers were now.
Well, I mean, exactly. So we have an extremely philosophical question to end the show on. But before we do, where can people find you on social media?
They can find me on all good social media platforms and the bad one at Virtual Statman.
Okay, we'll leave it to people's imagination what the bad one is, but it's also the one that perhaps has one of the most rampant Formula One communities, I would guess.
X marks the spot.
Oh, I see what you did there. Fantastic. Okay, go and you probably already do follow Virtual Statman if you listen to this show, but go and interact with him in a way that doesn't annoy him too much, but gets you a job. Okay, so philosophy. Final question, right? And to set it up, I presume that you don't mind the occasional pizza.
I'm not averse to the idea.
Fantastic. Okay, so it's a yes or no question. Pineapple on pizza?
No.
Wow. Okay, you know what you want. Would you eat it if someone else ordered it and it was going spare, or is that a solid no?
I would eat it. I'm more on the fence. Put it this way: I have not resorted to any extremism over the subject. You might say I'm a moderate anti-pineapplist. I see both sides of this. Because there's a lot of tensions between the two communities, and I feel like I could probably bring them together in the spirit of Christian harmony, and then we could have, and that's how we end up with a half and half pizza. You see, one half's got pineapple, one half doesn't, because it could be worse. It could be anchovies, and then we'd have war.
Ooh. Okay, yeah, I mean definitely no anchovies for me, but there we are. Yeah. Okay. Well, look, one more for the no pineapple brigade. That's me and not Jorgy, but. Your diplomatic spirit is spoken like a true networker and a guy that has managed to cultivate a career with a range of different sort of contractors, or what would you call them? Not suppliers, the opposite.
I think what you're saying is, wow, that guy sounds like a real creep, saying exactly what we need to hear at that moment. Wow, I don't trust him as far as I can throw him. He can put pineapple on his pizza, damn it.
Yeah, I mean, I might trust your stats, but I'm not sure. Your pizza choice is cool, for God.
Shifty character, shifty chancer.
Well, fantastic, Sean. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. Best of luck. I hope this week goes well and that we hear those two fantastic Giuseppe Farina stats on the show. Listen, guys, if you're listening at home, you've made it through we're over an hour and a half into the episode, which means if you don't already follow us, please follow us on your social media platform of choice. We're at Strip the Dip on even the bad one, but also all the good ones. And on your platform of choice for podcasts, please comment, please give us a positive review or a thumbs up, and do also get in touch. If you've got any questions for upcoming guests, let us know. If you've got any comments on this, or if you want us to, give Sean some feedback in person about or orally about his choices of pizzas, please feel free. So, Sean, last word to you before I close out. Anything else you want to add to the record before we disappear?
Yes. If you ever go to the Japanese Grand Prix, be prepared to spend at least 3 hours stuck in traffic. And also, if you're in Tokyo, the metro system music sticks in your head for life. Because trust me, it's been in my head for the last 2 weeks. So Yes, just a cautionary note about going to Suzuka, my favorite track on the Formula One calendar.
It's good once you got there, but if you're getting there seems like a challenge.
Yeah, definitely save up and get a helicopter because
I mean, you're not getting a helicopter already. 20 years in. Well, when are you going to get a helicopter?
To be honest with you, am I allowed to end the show with a name drop?
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
I end up leaving the track with Carl Reindler, who was the medical car driver. And when I finally got back to the hotel, he did some ace backstreet driving, and we finally got back to the hotel and taken some shortcuts where we were met with Bernd Mailander. So I was standing there like shooting the breeze with Bernd and Carl Reindler. I had the medical car driver and the safety car driver and me. How cool was that? So yeah, we was able to get some insider stories. So Carl, what did the start look like from your seat? Because you were right at the back, like where you were in the medical car. So it's able to get some quality knowledge about. So what are you actually doing there when the lights are going on? What are you concentrating on? Anyway, that's a subject for another episode.
Exactly.
We're drifting off the narrative here.
Telemarketer, you're kind of like upselling.
I am.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, on the Sean Kelly podcast next week,
yes.
with Bernd Mailander and the medical car driver. Well, look, double name drop. We love it. Thanks, Sean. It's been a real pleasure to get to know you over the last 90 minutes. Okay, well, best of luck in Qatar, as I say. Have a fantastic weekend. Have a fantastic rest of the season. Hope you manage to then get some rest in sunny SoCal. So if you're at home, check out our previous episodes. We've got a fantastic one with the Williams engineer. If you want to hear one with a guy that sells Ferraris for a living, we've got a live video episode of that, William Ross, hosted by Molly, special US All-Star edition. So go and check those out. Until next time, I've been your unusual co-host, F1 Black. This has been another fantastic episode of Jorgy Stripping the Dipping. Good night. See you soon.